The Calculus of Awakening. Chapter 1. The Great Clarification. In a universe adjacent to ours, where history had made all the same mistakes, but copyrighted them under different names, the richest man alive was Cassian Voss. Cassian owned 1 trillion crowns. Nobody knew exactly what a crown was worth anymore, because Cassian owned most of the companies responsible for deciding. He owned mines beneath countries he had never visited, factories inside cities he could not pronounce, farms whose crops he had never tasted, and enough housing to shelter millions of people who slept outside properties belonging to him. He owned a fleet of aircraft, 3 orbital residences, 9 newspapers, 14 governments, and a charity devoted to teaching poor children how to become entrepreneurs without lending them any money. The magazines called him a visionary. His employees called him Mr. Voss. His children called his assistant. Cassian considered himself a generous man because, once each year, he allowed a documentary crew to film him looking concerned. People asked him for money constantly. They wanted wells, hospitals, mosquito nets, schools, bridges, medicine, sanitation systems, crop insurance, debt forgiveness, and occasionally food. Cassian found this exhausting. He had already given the world several important gifts, including a social network that made everyone angrier, a rocket that could transport 6 extremely wealthy people somewhere useless, and a digital currency named after his childhood dog. Still, the requests continued. Everywhere he went, someone wanted something. A village wanted clean water. A hospital wanted generators. A nation wanted access to the minerals being extracted from beneath it. Cassian began to suspect that poverty had become a form of personal harassment. One morning, while eating a pear that had traveled farther than most refugees, he summoned his private council. They met in a glass room suspended over the Capitol. The floor was transparent, so Cassian could look down at the city without having to enter it. "I have decided," he told them, "to solve poverty." Nobody spoke. His advisors had learned that enthusiasm could be dangerous when the proposal had not yet been explained. Cassian's chief scientist, Dr. Vale, shifted uneasily. "What aspect of poverty?" she asked. "The mentality." "The mentality?" "Exactly. Poor people think too narrowly. They focus on food, shelter, medicine, safety, immediate things. They lack vision. They may focus on those things because they do not have them." Cassian smiled patiently. "That is the kind of thinking I intend to cure." Several months earlier, one of his pharmaceutical companies had developed an experimental psychedelic called Clarion. In small clinical trials, Clarion produced intense feelings of interconnectedness, heightened pattern recognition, vivid hallucinations, and a temporary inability to accept conventional explanations. Some subjects reported speaking to their ancestors. Others claimed to see the machinery of society operating behind ordinary life. One test participant spent 16 hours staring at a supermarket receipt and afterward refused to use money. Dr. Vale had recommended further study. Cassian recommended immediate global deployment. His plan was simple. Clarion would be introduced into municipal water systems throughout the poorest nations on Earth. Not the wealthy nations, naturally. Cassian believed wealthy people already possessed sufficient awareness, as evidenced by their wealth. He called the project the Great Clarification. "It will expand consciousness," he explained. "Without informing anyone?" asked Dr. Vale. "If we inform them, expectation may contaminate the results. That is not the main ethical concern. I have never found ethics particularly scalable." Cassian had a gift for saying monstrous things in the tone of a man requesting more towels. The operation began under cover of philanthropy. Cassian's foundation announced an ambitious clean water campaign. Reservoirs were treated, pipelines were upgraded, filtration plants received silver tanks bearing the foundation's smiling sun logo. The advertisement showed laughing children splashing in bright water beneath the words, "A new way of seeing." For the first 2 days, very little happened. On the 3rd day, 3/4 of the world began hallucinating. Fishermen saw constellations swimming beneath their boats. Factory workers heard machines confessing. Children watched numbers crawl out of textbooks and assemble themselves into doorways. Across one entire province, every dog appeared to speak with the voice of a disappointed grandmother. There were mass visions of ancient forests, unborn descendants, forgotten gods, future ruins, and one enormous luminous chicken that appeared independently to people in 12 countries. Cassian watched the reports from his orbital villa. "Remarkable," he said. Then the arithmetic began. Clarion had not merely expanded perception. It had dramatically intensified the human ability to recognize proportions, systems, recursive patterns, and concealed relationships. People who had struggled with basic division could suddenly calculate compound interest in their heads. Children derived tax structures from discarded invoices. Farmers mapped commodity markets using pebbles. Dock workers reconstructed global shipping profits from the markings on containers. Seamstresses calculated the difference between what they were paid to produce a shirt and what the shirt sold for overseas. Miners calculated the value of the ore they extracted each day, then compared it with their annual wages. Nurses calculated how many patients could have been treated for the price of Cassian's newest aircraft. Entire villages sat beneath trees performing long division. The results were upsetting. A woman named Amara in Delhi, who packed coffee for export, calculated that she would need to work 4,817 years to earn what Cassian gained while sleeping through one night. She checked the calculation twice. Then she checked who owned the coffee company. It was Cassian. A mechanic named Pyle discovered that the foreign debt owed by his country had already been repaid 6 times over in interest. A schoolboy called Nico calculated that Cassian's unused houses could accommodate every homeless child on his continent and still leave several thousand guest rooms unoccupied. A grandmother in the Republic of Seoul worked out that the annual maintenance cost of Cassian's largest yacht exceeded the combined budgets of 47 rural hospitals. She wrote the equation on the side of a grain warehouse. Someone photographed it. Within hours, it appeared everywhere. Then came other equations: wages against productivity, rent against construction costs, debt against repayment, profit against hunger, ownership against labor. People discovered that wealth was not a mountain produced by a single exceptional man. It was a river redirected through paperwork. For generations, the poor had been told the system was complicated. Now they saw that complication was often camouflage. The central equation was brutally simple. They produced nearly everything. They owned almost nothing. Cassian owned nearly everything. He produced almost nothing. The first slogan appeared in a copper mine. "We have done the math." It spread across walls, factory gates, bridges, fishing boats, train stations, and government buildings. Cassian was delighted. "They are engaging intellectually," he said. Then they stopped working. The copper miners walked out first. Factory workers followed. Dock workers refused to load luxury goods. Farmers stopped exporting food while neighbors went hungry. Truck drivers parked across financial districts. Bank employees opened private ledgers to the public. Programmers released ownership databases. Accountants, intoxicated by both clarion and revenge, became the most dangerous people alive. Every hidden company was mapped. Every offshore account was identified. Every shell corporation was cracked open. Every charitable donation was compared with the tax deduction it produced. The poor had always suspected they were being cheated. Now they could express the cheating to 6 decimal places. Cassian ordered his news companies to restore calm. The networks described the movement as emotional, even though its members carried spreadsheets. Experts warned that redistributing wealth would be mathematically impossible. The protesters corrected their equations live on television. Politicians called them uninformed. They published the politicians' investment portfolios. Economists called their demands simplistic. A group of 14-year-olds released a 900-page rebuttal. Then a second phrase began appearing beneath the first. "The table is set." Cassian's security advisors found this concerning. His public relations team insisted it referred to dialogue. Nobody on the security team believed them. Soon, a chant traveled from city to city. It crossed mountains and oceans. It moved through factories, farms, universities, prisons, refugee camps, barracks, ports, and offices. "Eat the rich." Cassian called an emergency broadcast. He appeared before the world in a plain gray shirt that had been selected by 6 consultants to suggest humility. "I understand that many people are experiencing powerful emotions," he said. Across the planet, 3/4 of humanity checked their calculations. The emotions were not the problem. My intention was to raise awareness. People agreed that he had. I wanted humanity to recognize its fundamental interconnectedness. People agreed with that too. We are all part of one global family. At this, the laughter began. It started in one room, then another. It spread through villages, cities, and continents, until almost the entire inhabited world was laughing at once. Cassian waited. He had never heard billions of people laugh at him before. It sounded different from applause. Chapter 2. The exponential error, the great clarification, became the great accounting. Workers took control of factories. Tenant unions opened empty apartment towers. Medical patents were copied and distributed freely. Private water systems became public utilities. Land deeds were examined against centuries of theft, coercion, and fabricated law. Cassian's satellites were repurposed to provide free communications. His cargo fleet began carrying food and medicine instead of luxury vehicles. His banks were converted into public trusts. His private islands became wildlife preserves, except for one, which became a rehabilitation center for former management consultants. Cassian retreated to his largest estate. The estate had 84 bedrooms, 12 kitchens, 5 cinemas, 3 artificial lakes, and no one willing to work there. His cooks left. His cleaners left. His pilots left. His guards spent an afternoon calculating the ratio between their salaries and the value of the property they protected. Then they left too. Cassian wandered through the mansion, hungry. He found a kitchen filled with ingredients, but did not know what any of them became. He tried to cook rice without water. He attempted to open a tin with a fountain pen. Finally, he found a packet of emergency biscuits inside a helicopter. He ate them alone in the ballroom. Outside the gates, people gathered. They carried no weapons. They carried calculators, contracts, receipts, invoices, tax records, and property maps. At the front stood Amara and Dele, the coffee packer. Cassian watched her approach. Behind her stretched a crowd too large to purchase. "You drugged the world," she said. "I enlightened it. You experimented on billions of people without consent. I gave you awareness. You gave us evidence." Cassian looked past her at the crowd. "What happens now?" "We eat the rich." Cassian's face strained of color. Amara looked him over. "Not literally," she said. "There is not enough seasoning in the world." The crowd laughed. Then they entered the estate and began the final calculation. They did not kill Cassian. They did something he considered far worse. They made him ordinary. His fortune was dismantled through law, seizure, debt cancellation, restitution, public ownership, and millions of acts of organized refusal. His vacant homes were open. His patents were released. His financial holdings were divided among the people whose labor had created them. His mines became worker cooperatives. His farmland became local commons. His media empire was broken apart until no single person could purchase public reality. His trillion crowns fell to 100 billion. Cassian called it theft. They reduced it to 10 billion. He called it persecution. They reduced it to 1 billion. He called it tyranny. They reduced it to 10 million. He called it the end of civilization. Finally, he was left with a comfortable house, a modest income, excellent health care, free education, reliable public transport, clean water, and enough food for the rest of his life. He called this poverty. Amara called it perspective. But Cassian could not accept the equation. The problem with siphoning 1 trillion crowns out of the global economy, he told himself, was that it required an immense amount of paperwork to maintain the illusion of legitimacy. As the newly enlightened planetary collective began systematically deleting those legal fictions, Cassian watched his empire vanish like a sandcastle caught in a high tide of long division. He was furious. It was an objective, self-evident truth, at least within the cathedral of his own ego, that he was fundamentally better than the masses. If they were now operating at a baseline of hyper-rational genius because of his waterborne benevolence, then he was structurally obligated to scale upward. He did not belong in the ordinary middle margins of a spreadsheet. He belonged in the exponent. In his private medical bay, inside a secure vault protected by a biometric lock that was currently losing its power supply, sat a single amber vial. This was the Omega strain, the raw, unrefined, hyper-concentrated molecular matrix from which the global catalyst had been derived, where the water supply had been treated with a microscopic dilution of 0.001%. This vial contained the pure, undiluted essence of systemic awareness. His reasoning was flawless in its narcissism. If a fraction of a milligram could turn a coffee packer into a macroeconomic savant, then the entire vial would elevate his mind into a state of cosmic architecture. He would see through time, manipulate markets by sheer force of predictive calculation, and hold the entire global ledger in his head like a subroutine. He would become a god, looking down upon a planet of mere accountants. He uncorked the vial. He dissolved it into a glass of synthetic, carbon-negative mineral water harvested from an iceberg he had purchased in 2021. "To the correction of the margin," he whispered to the empty room. He drank it all. It took exactly 4 seconds for Cassian to realize he had made the most catastrophic mathematical error in human history. The human brain is an organic machine optimized by millions of years of evolution to filter out 99% of reality so it can focus on not dying. The catalyst worked by turning those filters off, allowing the mind to perceive the deeper patterns beneath society. But human biology possesses an immutable threshold for data processing. When Cassian's filters shattered entirely, his awareness didn't stop at global supply chains. It kept expanding, tearing through the macroeconomy and plunging straight into the terrifying raw data of the physical universe. He did not just see the math of his wealth. He saw the math of everything, all at once, with absolute, unyielding clarity. He looked at his hand and did not see skin. He saw the real-time probability matrix of 88 octillion subatomic particles vibrating in a state of quantum entanglement. He looked at the walls of his estate and was instantly blinded by the auditory roar of tectonic plates shifting 300 miles below him, translated into a terrifyingly loud harmonic frequency. Worse, his mind began tracking every single economic transaction occurring across the globe simultaneously. He felt the exact weight of 3 billion people breathing, the precise caloric expenditure of every worker planting grain, and the specific, crushing mathematical weight of the centuries of suffering his horde had financed. The data stream didn't buffer. It poured into his consciousness at the speed of light. The final bitter irony of the Omega strain was that math is entirely indifferent to human ego. It has no loyalty to billionaires. As Cassian's mind reached the absolute peak of cosmic comprehension, it looked backward at his own identity, the construct of Cassian Voss, the proud trillionaire, the master of capital, and applied the laws of universal optimization to it. The universe, he realized with agonizing clarity, abhors an imbalance. In the grand calculus of existence, an individual hoarding 1 trillion units of energy while the system around them starves is not a visionary. It is a localized pocket of high entropy, a systemic anomaly, a friction point that must be smoothed out for the equation to balance. His newly ascended, hyper-rational mind looked at his own ego and came to a flawless, logical consensus. The variable must be reduced to zero. When the Public Reallocation Committee finally entered the estate the next morning, they didn't find a god or a tyrant. They found a man sitting cross-legged on the floor of the ballroom, staring intently at a single dust mote drifting through a beam of sunlight. His eyes were wide, clear, and completely peaceful. "Is he dead?" asked one of the committee members, a former dock worker who was currently balancing the global shipping lanes on a digital tablet. "No," whispered Amara, looking closely into Cassian's unblinking eyes. "He's just doing the dishes." He was entirely catatonic, his brain permanently occupied with calculating the exact thermodynamic cost of the universe expanding. He had wanted to be 1 billion times more aware than everyone else, and the universe had granted his wish by showing him exactly how insignificant he truly was. They gently led him out of the estate and down to the street. He didn't protest when they placed him in the passenger seat of a clean, quiet, publicly owned electric tram. He just smiled, watching the wheels turn, calculating the friction coefficients to the 16th decimal place, completely satisfied to finally be a perfectly balanced part of the machine. Epilogue. The new equilibrium. The world did not become perfect afterward. Clarion had revealed patterns, not solutions. There were arguments, errors, failed experiments, bad harvests, foolish leaders, and committees that somehow required 9 meetings to select a chair. But hunger became rare. Nobody owned 10,000 homes. No child died because a medicine was protected by a patent. No village lost its water because a spreadsheet in a distant city demanded higher returns. The phrase, "eat the rich," survived. Although its meaning changed, it meant consuming the legal fictions that made extreme wealth possible. It meant digesting empires into communities. It meant turning ownership back into use. It meant that no one would ever again be allowed to accumulate enough power to confuse personal appetite with human destiny. Cassian lived for another 30 years. He spent them in the entirely average 2-bedroom apartment they had settled him into in a cleanly run municipal district. He was provided with excellent, universally distributed health care, efficient public transit, clean water, and access to a community garden. He spent his days attempting to write a massive, multi-volume economic treatise, proving that the global system had been stolen from him. The local library placed it on the bottom shelf of the historical fiction section, right next to the books about the divine right of kings. He also spent those years insisting the great clarification had unfolded exactly as intended. In interviews, he claimed credit for the new society. He wrote a memoir titled, "How I Taught the World to See." It sold poorly. The final copy was purchased by a public library where it was shelved in the comedy section. History remembered Cassian Voss as the man who tried to cure the poor of poverty by altering their minds. Instead, he cured them of believing him. He had wanted 3/4 of humanity to look inward. They did. Then they looked upward. Then they looked at one another. Finally, they looked at the numbers. And the numbers, unlike billionaires, did not require worship.